Terry shivered as the transport ship rumbled beneath her feet. The holding cell was cold, designed to keep merchandise docile. That's what she was now. Merchandise. Just 3 days ago, she had been a daughter, a sister, a person with dreams. Now she was property. The young Vexillian girl huddled in the corner, her pale blue skin rippling with distress patterns that glowed faintly in the dim light. She wrapped her thin arms around her knees, trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear. Eat. The guard shoved a tray of gray protein paste through the slot in the door. Captain Mock says you need to look healthy for the buyers. Terry turned away. Food held no appeal, not since her father had taken her hand and led her to the strange ship, his eyes never meeting hers. Not since her mother had hugged her goodbye with tears streaming down her face, whispering that this sacrifice would save them all. The drought has left us nothing, her father had explained the night before. The collectors will take your siblings next if we can't pay. Terry had nodded, not understanding what he meant. By morning, she did. The guard banged on the door. Eat, or we force it down. Your choice. Reluctantly, Terry reached for the tray. Force-feeding had been unpleasant the first day. She wouldn't risk it again. She choked down the tasteless paste while memories of her mother's cooking brought tears to her eyes. As she ate, the ship lurched sharply. Terry fell against the wall, the tray clattering to the floor. All hands, prepare for emergency maneuvers. A voice announced over the speakers. Patrol ship detected at coordinates 227 to 8941. Terry's heart jumped. Patrol ships meant authorities. Perhaps rescue. The hope died quickly when the voice continued. Standard evasion protocol. Secure all cargo. The door slid open, and Captain Mock himself entered. He was tall for a Krell, with rough gray skin and eyes that never showed emotion. Up, he ordered, grabbing Terry's arm. We're moving you somewhere safer. Safer for me or for you? Terry asked, immediately regretting her boldness. Mock's grip tightened painfully. Clever little thing. Your kind always are. That's what makes you valuable. He dragged her through narrow corridors, down 2 levels, to a hidden compartment beneath the cargo hold. 3 other aliens were already crammed inside. A furry Monterey child, an elderly Fira with broken tusks, and a creature Terry couldn't identify, its features hidden beneath a breathing mask. Stay silent or stay dead, Mock warned, sealing them in darkness. Hours passed. The ship shuddered and groaned as it executed evasive maneuvers. The compartment grew hot, the air stale. The Monterey child whimpered until the Fira elder stroked its fur with a gentle hand. Terry pressed her palms against the metal wall, feeling the vibrations of the engines. She was the daughter of a mechanic. She knew ships. This one was pushing its limits, the reactor core straining to deliver more power than it was designed for. They're still following, whispered the masked alien, its voice oddly musical despite the fear. The patrol won't give up easily. How do you know? Terry asked. I can feel the pursuit. My people sense these things. A violent jolt threw them all to one side. Warning alarms blared briefly before being silenced. What was that? The Monterey child squeaked. Ion blast, Terry explained, but not direct. Just close. The masked alien leaned closer. You know ships. Terry nodded. My father taught me. Before she couldn't finish. Mine sold me to pay gambling debts, the alien said simply. At least yours had a reason. The compartment door suddenly slid open. Light flooded in, blinding them momentarily. Captain Mock stood there with 2 armed crew members. We lost them, he announced. Back to your cells. As they shuffled out, Terry noticed the viewports were now covered with metal shields. Evasion protocol. She'd never see the stars this way, never know where they were taking her. Back in her cell, Terry found a new tray waiting. This one held better food. Actual fruit, meat, even a sweet. Buyer prep. They were getting close to their destination. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. If they wanted her healthy, She would be healthy. Survival first, then escape. Her father had taught her that too, though he probably never imagined she would use the lesson this way. That night, as the ship's lights dimmed to simulate evening, Terry lay on her narrow bunk and reached out with her mind. Vixilians weren't true telepaths, but their empathic abilities let them sense emotions, sometimes project them. She had never been particularly skilled. Her younger sister had shown more talent, but desperation was a powerful teacher. She felt the crew first. Boredom, greed, lust, fear. Captain Mock was a blank spot, his emotions either too alien or too controlled to detect. Then she found her fellow captives. The child's terror, the elder's resignation, the masked alien's simmering rage, and something else, something far away but approaching. A presence that felt different, clear, purposeful. It flickered at the edge of her awareness like a distant star. Terry concentrated harder, reaching toward that presence, but exhaustion pulled her under before she could touch it. She dreamed of her home world, of purple skies and the sound of her siblings playing. She dreamed of her mother's hands braiding her hair, of her father's deep laugh. She dreamed of freedom. The next morning, Captain Mock himself brought her breakfast. "We reach Meridian Station tomorrow," he said, watching her with those empty eyes. "You've been sold to the Arbiter. He runs the auctions there." "And after?" Terry asked, keeping her voice steady. Mock shrugged. "Not my concern. But Vixilians with your potential usually go to the pleasure houses or private collections. Your empathic abilities make you valuable companions." Terry looked down at her food, hiding the flash of fear in her eyes. She would not give him the satisfaction. "Eat well," Mock continued. "Look healthy. The better you present, the better your chances of a kind owner." When he left, Terry pushed the tray away and went to the small sink in the corner. She splashed water on her face, watching the distress patterns on her skin slowly fade to a dull glow. "I am not merchandise," she whispered to her reflection. "I am Terry of House Lenu. I will survive this. I will escape. I will find my way home." But even as she made this promise to herself, she felt the ship change course, felt the subtle shift in gravity as they began their approach to Meridian Station, the infamous trading hub where lives were bought and sold like cargo. And somewhere, still distant but drawing nearer, that strange presence continued to flicker at the edge of her consciousness. June moved through the crowded main concourse of Meridian Station, his steps unhurried and his eyes constantly scanning. To anyone watching, he was just another trader looking for deals, dressed in well-worn clothes that blended with the station's lower-tier merchants. The small scar on his left cheek and his slightly hunched posture completed the disguise, not someone worth noticing, which was exactly how he wanted it. 3 months of deep cover work had taught him the rhythms of Meridian. He knew which security cameras worked and which were just for show. He knew which guards could be bribed and which would report suspicious activity. Most importantly, he knew the ships that carried more than the cargo listed on their manifests. Ships like Captain Mock's freighter, the Rust Dagger, which had docked at Bay 17 less than an hour ago. Jun paused at a food stall, ordering noodles he didn't want while observing the bay entrance through the steam rising from the cooking pots. His hidden earpiece crackled softly. "Agent Park, confirm your position," came the voice of his handler, Director Ran. "In visual range of target docking bay," Jun replied quietly, his lips barely moving. "No movement yet. Manifest lists machine parts and processed ore. Our sources indicate this shipment includes at least 4 sentients for the black market. Document everything, but do not interfere. We need to identify the entire network." Jun acknowledged with a small grunt. The directive to observe rather than intervene had been the hardest part of this assignment. Each time he watched beings loaded onto transports like cargo, each time he recorded sales rather than stopping them, a piece of his soul hardened. But the coalition needed evidence to shut down the entire trafficking network, not just one ship or one sale. So he watched, he recorded, He waited. The noodle vendor handed him a steaming bowl. June paid and moved to a bench with a clear view of Bay 17. As he pretended to eat, the bay doors finally opened. Two of Mock's crew emerged first, scanning the area. Their hands rested on holstered weapons. Behind them came 3 more crew members escorting what appeared to be 4 people in restraints. June's enhanced contact lenses automatically zoomed and captured images as he looked down at his food. A Montaran child, an elderly Pharaoh, a being in an environmental suit that obscured its features, and a young Vexillian female. June's attention lingered on the Vexillian. Her blue skin showed unusual luminescence patterns that flickered and changed, a sign of higher empathic abilities. She walked with her head down, but there was a tension in her shoulders that spoke of defiance rather than defeat. Last came Captain Mock himself, speaking into a communicator. June's directional microphone picked up fragments. Quality merchandise, especially the Vexillian. Rare potential, bidding to start at. The group moved toward the private lifts that led to the station's more exclusive levels. June discarded his barely touched noodles and followed at a distance, careful to stay in the crowd. Target moving to the spire, he subvocalized to his handler. Confirmed 4 captives, including a Vexillian female with Class 3 or higher empathic markers. Director Rand's voice sharpened. Class 3. Are you certain? The skin patterns are consistent with high empathic potential. Market value would be significant. Understood. Continue surveillance. Be advised that a high-value Vexillian might attract more dangerous buyers. June frowned. The spire was the most exclusive area of Meridian Station, accessible only to the wealthiest visitors. His trader disguise wouldn't get him past the first security checkpoint. He changed direction, heading for the maintenance access corridors. Years of undercover work had taught him that service staff could go almost anywhere if they looked like they belonged. In a supply closet, he quickly exchanged his trader clothes for a technician's uniform and grabbed a repair kit. 10 minutes later, he was riding a service elevator to the spire, his falsified work order showing on his tablet. The security guard had barely glanced at it before waving him through. The difference between the spire and the lower levels was stark. Gone were the crowded corridors and noisy vendors. Here, plush carpets muffled footsteps, and soft lighting flattered the features of the wealthy beings who moved with the confidence of predators. June kept his eyes down, moving with purpose toward the private suites where the auctions would be held. His scanner detected multiple security systems, all far more sophisticated than those in the lower levels. He paused at a junction, pretending to check a panel while actually scanning for Muck's group. They were already inside Suite 12, according to his tracker. The auction would begin soon. In position near target location, he reported, preparing to access observation point. Be careful, Agent Park. Director Rand warned. The arbiter who runs these auctions has ties to the syndicate. If your cover is blown, extraction will be difficult. June acknowledged and continued down the corridor. A maintenance duct above Suite 12 would give him visual access without triggering the security sensors. He just needed to find an access point. As he rounded a corner, he nearly collided with another technician, a young woman who looked as startled as he felt. Sorry, she murmured, stepping aside. June nodded politely and continued past, but something made him glance back. The woman was watching him with narrowed eyes. Something about her posture seemed wrong for a maintenance worker. Too alert, too balanced. Another undercover operative, a private security guard. He couldn't be sure, but he needed to be more careful. Finding an access panel, Jun made a show of opening it and examining the circuits inside. When no one was looking, he slipped into the narrow maintenance shaft beyond. The duct was cramped but navigable. June moved silently, following his scanner toward Suite 12. Through small vents, he caught glimpses of the exclusive world below. Wealthy beings from dozens of species enjoying luxuries while discussing acquisitions as if they were talking about furniture rather than living beings. Finally, he reached the vent above Suite 12. Below him, The four captives stood on a small raised platform. Captain Mock was speaking to a tall, elegant alien that June recognized as the Arbiter, the most exclusive broker on Meridian Station. "The Vexillion is the prize," Mock was saying. "Her empathic signature is the strongest I've seen in years, perfect for a personal companion or entertainer's guild." The Arbiter examined the Vexillion girl, who stared back with surprising steadiness. "She shows spirit. That could be valuable or problematic, depending on the buyer." "I call it valuable," Mock argued. "Breaking spirits is easy. Finding one with this kind of potential is rare." June's hand tightened on his scanner. The casual cruelty of the conversation made his stomach turn. He forced himself to focus, to record everything. The evidence would bring this whole operation down, but only if he remained undetected. The Arbiter touched the Vexillion's face, turning it toward the light. "She'll be the headline at tomorrow's auction. I have at least 3 clients who will pay premium for this level of empathic ability." As if sensing she was being discussed, the Vexillion girl looked up, directly at the vent where June was hidden. For a moment, he could have sworn their eyes met through the slats. Then something stranger happened. A faint glow spread across her skin in a pattern he'd never seen before. She continued staring at the vent, her expression changing subtly. Had she sensed him somehow? Vexillions were empaths, able to detect and sometimes influence emotions. But at this distance, through physical barriers. "What's happening with her skin?" the Arbiter asked, noticing the change. "Just another display of her abilities," Mock said proudly. "She's probably sensing the emotions in the room." The girl finally looked away from the vent, but Jun remained frozen. Something had passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, or maybe it was just his imagination, the product of 3 months of undercover work and too little sleep. Either way, he had a decision to make. The Coalition wanted the entire network, which meant letting the auction proceed while gathering evidence. But the Vexillion girl would be sold tomorrow, possibly to someone who would exploit her abilities in terrible ways. For the first time in his career, Agent Jun Park considered breaking protocol. "Agent Park, report status." Director Rand's voice interrupted his thoughts. June took a deep breath. "Target confirmed in Suite 12. Auction scheduled for tomorrow. 4 captives, including the Vexillion. Maintain surveillance. Do not intervene." As June watched the Vexillion being led away to a holding cell, he responded with the proper acknowledgement. But his mind was already calculating alternatives, weighing risks against rewards, duty against conscience. Tomorrow would bring difficult choices. The auction would begin in 3 hours. June checked his equipment one last time as he moved through the maintenance tunnels of Meridian Station. The small pulse disruptor was tucked into his boot. The security bypass module was strapped to his wrist under his sleeve. Everything was ready. Everything except his conscience. "This is a direct violation of orders, Agent Park," Director Rand had said when June called in his plan. "You will compromise 3 months of intelligence gathering. The Vexillion won't survive a week with the buyers I've identified," June had replied. "Some lines can't be crossed, not even for the mission." The communication had ended with Rand's warning. "You'll be on your own. No extraction. No backup." Now, as June approached the high-security holding cells, he accepted that reality. His career was probably over. But he couldn't watch another sale, couldn't document another life destroyed for profit. The holding area was quiet. Most security personnel were preparing for the auction, leaving only 2 guards at the main entrance. June avoided them entirely, using a service duct that maintenance workers had forgotten existed. He emerged in a narrow corridor behind the cells. Each door had a small window and a complex electronic lock. June moved silently from door to door, peering inside each. The Montaran child was sleeping in the 3rd cell. The elderly Farah sat motionless in the 4th. The masked alien paced restlessly in the 5th. The Vexillion girl was in the last cell, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Her eyes were closed, but as June approached, they snapped open, and looked directly at him. No surprise showed on her face, as if she had been waiting for him. June pressed his finger to his lips, then turned to the lock. The security bypass module did its work, and the door slid open with only the faintest hiss. The Vexillian girl stood up but didn't move toward the door. "I'm here to help," June whispered in trade language. "We don't have much time." She tilted her head. "You were watching yesterday. From above." "Yes. No point denying it. My name is June. I'm with the Coalition Sentient Rights Division. I am Terry." Her voice was soft but clear. "Why are you risking yourself for me?" It was a good question. One June had asked himself repeatedly over the last sleepless night. "Because it's right," he said simply. "Will you come?" Terry glanced at the other cells. "What about them?" June hesitated. His plan was already dangerous with just the two of them. 4 escapees would be impossible to hide. "I can't help everyone," he admitted. "Not today." Terry's skin rippled with patterns that somehow conveyed disappointment. "Then I cannot go." "They'll sell you to the highest bidder in less than 3 hours," June argued. "You'll never be free again. And they will suffer the same fate if I leave them." Her eyes met his steadily. "Freedom for one is not freedom." June checked his timer. The guard patrol would return in 8 minutes. He had planned everything for 1 rescue, not 4. But looking at Terry's determined face, he knew he couldn't force her to come. And he couldn't leave her behind. "All of you then," he decided. "But it won't be easy." For the first time, Terry smiled. The glow patterns on her skin shifted to something brighter. Nothing worthwhile ever is. They worked quickly. June opened each cell while Terry explained to the others in hushed tones. The Montaran child clung to the Fira elder. The masked alien nodded vigorously. "We follow your lead," Terry told June. "But we need weapons." "No weapons," June countered. "We avoid conflict. The first alarm locks down the entire section." He led them back through the service duct, the tight space forcing them to crawl single file. The Fira elder struggled, his old joints protesting, but he made no complaint. They emerged in a storage room filled with cleaning supplies. June checked his scanner. The path to the emergency docks was clear for now, but they would have to cross 2 main corridors. "Stay close. Move only when I signal," he instructed. They had just reached the first corridor when June's scanner beeped a warning. Security guards were approaching from both directions. "Back," he hissed, pushing the group into an alcove barely large enough for them all. The masked alien's breathing equipment made a faint wheezing sound that seemed deafening in the quiet corridor. The guards passed within 2 meters, discussing the upcoming auction. One of them mentioned the Vexillian girl specifically. "Arbiter says she'll go for at least 50,000 credits," the guard said. "Some syndicate boss wants her for his collection." When they were gone, June led the group forward again. They were halfway to the emergency docks when the station's lights suddenly dimmed. Red emergency lighting clicked on. "What's happening?" the Montaran child squeaked. June checked his scanner. "Power fluctuation in the main reactor. It happens sometimes on these older stations. They will discover we are missing soon," the masked alien said, its melodic voice tense. "This is good," June decided. "The confusion will help us." They continued through increasingly deserted corridors as most personnel responded to the power issues. The emergency docks were used primarily for evacuation scenarios, which made them perfect for their escape. June had prepared a small transport ship with falsified clearance codes. They were almost there when an alarm suddenly blared through the station. "Security alert, Section 8. 4 prisoners escaped. All personnel respond." June swore under his breath. "Run." Now, they abandoned stealth for speed, racing down the final corridor. The emergency dock was just ahead, its doors standing open due to the power fluctuation. June's ship waited inside, a small transport vessel with nondescript markings. As they reached the dock, a plasma bolt sizzled past June's head, leaving a scorch mark on the wall. Stop or the next one goes through your spine. Captain Mock's voice echoed from behind them. June pushed Terry toward the ship. Get them aboard. Start the engines. He turned to face Mock, who stood with 2 guards, all holding plasma rifles. Coalition agent, Mock sneered. I suspected as much. You've cost me a fortune today. You'll lose more than money when I'm done, Jun replied, slowly raising his hands. Mock laughed. You won't live to see tomorrow. As the captain stepped forward, Jun dropped to one knee, pulling the pulse disruptor from his boot in one smooth motion. He fired before Mock could react. The electromagnetic pulse hit all 3 of them, temporarily overloading their nervous systems. They collapsed, twitching uncontrollably. June turned to run for the ship when a 3rd guard appeared from a side passage. The plasma bolt caught June in the shoulder, spinning him around. Pain exploded through his body as he fell. Through a haze of agony, he saw Terry running toward him instead of the ship. Go back, he tried to say, but the words wouldn't come. Terry reached him as the guard prepared to fire again. She placed her hands on June's temples, and suddenly the pain diminished. Her skin glowed intensely as she somehow absorbed part of his suffering. The guard fired again, but the Fira elder had followed Terry, and now threw himself in front of them. The bolt struck his arm, burning through the tough hide. The masked alien appeared next, tackling the guard with surprising strength. The Montaran child darted forward and grabbed the fallen plasma rifle, pointing it with shaking hands at the other guards who were beginning to recover from the pulse. Help me lift him, Terry said to the Fira elder, who nodded despite his own injury. Together, they half-carried June to the ship. The masked alien followed, dragging the unconscious guard's weapon. Inside the transport, June fought to stay conscious long enough to enter the launch codes. His vision kept blurring, but Terry's hand on his good shoulder somehow kept him focused. The coordinates, he gasped as the engines came to life. Coalition Outpost, Sector 7. The ship lurched away from the dock as more security forces arrived. Plasma bolts struck the hull but couldn't penetrate the shields. As they cleared the station, Jun finally allowed himself to slump back in the pilot's seat. His shoulder was a mess of charred flesh and fabric, but the bleeding was minimal thanks to the cauterizing nature of plasma weapons. Terry knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his wound. I can help with the pain, but it needs real treatment. Why did you come back for me? Jun asked, his voice weak. Terry's skin patterns shifted to something gentle and warm. You risked everything for strangers. How could I do less? As the ship accelerated away from Meridian Station, Jun realized that for the first time in years, he had done exactly what he believed in, not just what he was ordered to do. And somehow, that made the pain easier to bear. The small transport ship drifted through the silence of deep space, its engines running at minimal power to avoid detection. Inside, the vessel's unexpected crew had established an uneasy routine. 5 days had passed since their escape from Meridian Station, and the Coalition outpost was still 7 days away at their current speed. Terry sat in the co-pilot's chair, watching the stars through the view screen. The vastness of space still amazed her. On her homeworld, thick cloud layers had hidden the stars most nights. Now they surrounded her, countless and brilliant. How is your shoulder? She asked without turning. June looked up from the navigation console. He had sensed her awareness of him before she spoke. The Vexillian's empathic abilities were stronger than he had initially realized. Better, he answered, rotating his arm carefully. Your treatment helps. Terry's people had developed techniques to accelerate healing through empathic connections. Twice daily, she would place her hands near his injured shoulder, drawing away pain and promoting tissue repair. The wound that should have taken weeks to heal was already forming healthy scar tissue. The medical kit was nearly empty, she said. You were not planning to rescue 4 of us. June smiled slightly. I wasn't planning to get shot either. A comfortable silence fell between them. In the back of the ship, the elderly Fira, who had introduced himself as Konu, was teaching the young Montaran child, Linny, a game involving colored stones. The masked alien, who called himself Drev, was tinkering with the ship's communication system, trying to boost its range. They had become an unlikely family of sorts. Each night, they gathered to share their stories. Konu had been captured after his village refused to abandon their ancestral lands to mining corporations. Limmy had been separated from her parents during a raid on their refugee transport. Drev had been a scientist before political enemies arranged his disappearance. And Terry, her story still brought a tightness to Jun's chest when he thought about it. "I've been thinking about what you told us," Jun said quietly, "about your family." Terry's skin flickered with patterns that indicated discomfort. "I do not wish to speak of them. I understand, but holding anger hurts you more than them." "Is that what your coalition training teaches?" Her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard before. "No," Jun admitted. "That's what experience teaches." An alarm suddenly blared from the console, interrupting their conversation. Jun's fingers flew over the controls. "What is it?" Terry asked, tensing. Long-range scanner detected a ship, patrol vessel, heavy class. Jun pulled up the tactical display. "They haven't spotted us yet, but they're on an intercept course." Drev rushed into the cockpit, his breathing apparatus wheezing with his hurried movements. "Is it Meridian security?" "Worse," Jun said grimly. "It's the Syndicate. The Arbiter must have contacted them when we escaped." Limmy appeared in the doorway, her furry face pinched with fear. "Will they take us back?" "No," Jun said firmly. "But we need to change course." He adjusted their trajectory, steering the small ship toward a nearby asteroid field. It was risky, but the dense collection of space rocks would hide them from sensors and make pursuit difficult. As they entered the field, Jun powered down all non-essential systems. The ship grew colder almost immediately as the heating systems shut down. "Limmy, get the emergency blankets," Terry instructed. "Konu, help me secure everything that might make noise." They worked quickly, preparing for what might be hours of drifting silently through the asteroid field. Jun maneuvered carefully between the massive rocks, some as large as small moons. The patrol ship followed at a distance, scanning methodically. "They're persistent," Drev observed, watching the tactical display over Jun's shoulder. "They have orders to find us," Jun replied. "The Vexillion especially would be worth the effort." Terry looked away, her skin patterns shifting to a dull, muted glow that Jun had come to recognize as shame. "This is not your fault," he told her quietly. "They hunt us because of me," she responded. "Because I am valuable." "They hunt us because they believe people can be property," Jun corrected. "That is their evil, not yours." A sudden impact rocked the ship, throwing them against their restraints. A small asteroid had clipped their port side. "Damage report," Jun called out, checking the systems. "Hull integrity at 92%, Drev reported. "But the navigation system is offline." Jun swore under his breath. Without navigation, finding their way through the asteroid field would be nearly impossible. They would have to stop and make repairs. He guided the ship into the shadow of a larger asteroid that would provide some cover. Once they were positioned, he killed the engines entirely. The ship fell into true silence, drifting with the space rock. "I need to fix the navigation array," Jun said, unbuckling his restraints. "Drev, can you help?" The masked alien nodded. "I worked on similar systems before my capture." They moved to the maintenance hatch in the floor of the cockpit. Jun pulled it open, revealing a tangle of cables and circuit boards. "Terry, I need your hands," Jun said. "The access point is too narrow for both Drev and me." Terry joined them, kneeling beside the open hatch. Jun explained what needed to be done. She would reach into the narrow access point and reconnect the cables as he instructed. As they worked, the patrol ship drew closer. Its powerful sensors swept the asteroid field methodically. "They're approaching our position," Konu warned from the tactical display. 4 minutes until they're in visual range." Terry's hands moved faster, connecting delicate components according to June's instructions. Her fingers were slimmer than his, perfect for the tight space. "Last connection," June said, passing her a small circuit board. "This goes at the back, connected to the blue and yellow cables." As Terry reached deeper into the access shaft, the ship suddenly shuddered. Another small asteroid had grazed them, knocking Terry off balance. Her arm scraped against a jagged edge of metal, tearing her skin. Blue blood welled from the cut, but she didn't pull back. "Almost there," she grunted, stretching further until she felt the connections click into place. The navigation display flickered back to life just as Konu called out, "2 minutes." Jun helped Terry up, noticing the blood on her arm. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," she said, moving back to her seat. "What now?" June studied the navigation system, plotting a course that would take them through the densest part of the asteroid field, where the patrol ship wouldn't follow. "We go where they can't," he said, powering up the engines just enough for controlled movement. The small ship slipped between massive asteroids, sometimes with only meters to spare. June's hands moved confidently over the controls, his face intense with concentration. Beside him, Terry monitored the patrol ship's position, calling out distances and vectors. They worked together as if they had done so for years, anticipating each other's needs without speaking. When a particularly close pass required a sudden course correction, Terry's hand was already reaching for the auxiliary thruster control before June could ask. "They're turning away," Konu announced after nearly an hour of tense navigation. "The asteroid density is too high for their vessel." A collective sigh of relief filled the cockpit. June plotted a course that would keep them within the asteroid field for another day before emerging far from their pursuer's search area. As the immediate danger passed, Terry finally allowed Drev to treat the cut on her arm. June watched her from across the cockpit, noting how she never complained despite the obvious pain. "You should rest," he told her when Drev finished applying the bandage. Terry shook her head. "I'll take the first watch. You've been piloting for hours." "We could both rest," June suggested. "Drev can monitor the systems." "I prefer to stay here," she said quietly. "The stars help me think." June understood. Sometimes the vastness of space provided perspective that nothing else could. He nodded and rose from his seat, pausing briefly beside her. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything today." Terry looked up at him, her skin glowing with patterns he was beginning to recognize as warmth, perhaps even affection. "We help each other," she replied. "That's what freedom means." As June made his way to the small sleeping quarters, he realized that this unplanned journey with these unexpected companions had changed something fundamental within him. The mission parameters and coalition protocols that had defined his life for so long now seemed less important than the beings who trusted him with their newfound freedom. And among them, a young Vexillian who had every reason to be bitter, but instead chose courage and compassion. The coalition outpost was still days away, but June already knew that reaching it would not be the end of their journey together. It would be just the beginning. Coalition Outpost Zeta 7 gleamed against the backdrop of space, its sleek curves and bright lights a welcome sight after 12 days of tense travel. Terry stood at the view screen as June guided their small ship toward the docking bay. Her reflection showed a changed person, no longer the frightened girl sold by her family, but someone who had faced danger and survived. "We're being hailed," Jum announced, activating the communication system. A stern voice filled the cockpit. "Unidentified vessel, this is Coalition Outpost Zeta 7 Security. State your business and authorization code." "Security Command, this is Agent Jun Park, identification Sierra Delta 459. Requesting emergency docking and medical assistance for rescued trafficking victims." There was a pause before the voice returned, noticeably warmer. "Agent Park, Director Rand reported you missing in action. Welcome back. Proceed to docking bay 3. As June maneuvered the ship toward the assigned bay, Terry felt a mixture of emotions washing over her. Relief at reaching safety, uncertainty about what would happen next, and something more complicated when she looked at June. The others gathered their few possessions. Konu had recovered well from his injury. Lemmy bounced with excitement at the prospect of solid ground. Drev remained quiet, his breathing apparatus making its familiar soft sounds. "What will happen to us?" Lenny asked, her furry ears twitching nervously. "You'll be safe here," June assured her. "The Coalition has programs to help victims of trafficking. They'll contact your homeworlds. Try to locate your families." Terry turned away at the mention of family. The wound of her parents' betrayal remained raw. June noticed her reaction, but said nothing. The ship settled onto the docking platform with a gentle thud. Through the view screen, Terry saw a welcoming committee waiting, medical personnel with hover stretchers, security officers, and a stern-looking woman whose uniform displayed more insignia than the others. "Director Ran," June said quietly. "My superior. She doesn't look happy." "You disobeyed orders to save us," Terry reminded him. "Best decision I ever made," he replied with a small smile. The docking ramp extended, and the ship's doors slid open. Fresh, processed air rushed in, carrying unfamiliar scents. Terry hesitated at the threshold while the others moved forward eagerly. June paused beside her. "It's all right. Take your time." She nodded gratefully. After so long in captivity, and then the close quarters of the ship, the open space of the docking bay seemed overwhelming. Medical staff immediately surrounded them, scanning for injuries and guiding them toward the stretchers. A doctor approached Terry, waving a scanner over her. "Remarkable readings," the doctor murmured. "Your empathic signature is extraordinarily strong. Are you experiencing any discomfort?" Before Terry could answer, Director Rand intercepted June, her expression tight. "Agent Park, your actions have compromised 3 months of intelligence gathering." "With respect, Director, I secured valuable witnesses against the trafficking network," June replied evenly, "including details about the Arbiter's operation that we didn't have before." Their conversation continued in low, intense tones as the medical team led Terry and the others away. She looked back over her shoulder, catching June's eye briefly. He nodded reassuringly before returning to his heated discussion with the director. The next days passed in a blur of medical examinations, debriefings, and adjustments to the outpost's environment. Coalition officials recorded their stories in detail, particularly interested in Terry's account of the Arbiter's operation. 5 days after their arrival, Terry sat alone in the outpost's observation lounge, watching distant stars through the massive viewport. She had been given comfortable quarters, clean clothes, and nutritious food. Everyone treated her with kindness. Yet she felt adrift, uncertain of her path forward. "May I join you?" June's voice came from behind her. Terry turned, surprised. She hadn't seen him since their arrival. "Of course." He sat beside her, looking more rested than she had ever seen him. His shoulder had been properly treated, though he still carried his arm somewhat carefully. "I've been in meetings," he explained, "and some disciplinary hearings." "Because of us?" Terry asked, her skin patterns shifting with concern. "Because of my choices," he corrected, "which I would make again." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars together. "They've contacted my homeworld," Terry finally said. "There are refugee camps for those displaced by the drought. My family is there." June studied her face. "Will you return to them?" The question hung in the air between them. Terry had asked herself the same thing many times over the past days. "I don't know if I can forgive them," she admitted, "but I understand their desperation better now. The drought destroyed everything they had built." "Understanding doesn't mean you must return," June said gently. "What other choice do I have? Where else would I go?" June handed her a datapad. "There are options. The Coalition has a cultural liaison program. They work with trafficking survivors who want to help others. Your empathic abilities would be invaluable." Terry took the pad, scrolling through the information. A purpose, a way forward that didn't require returning to painful memories. The possibility sent a hopeful glow across her skin. "What about the others?" she asked. "Konu has requested asylum. His homeworld is still under corporate control. Limmy's family has been located in a refugee settlement. They'll be reunited next month. And Drev," June smiled. "Drev turned out to be a rather famous scientist. His government is sending a diplomatic ship to collect him." "And you?" Terry asked quietly, the question that mattered most. June looked out at the stars. "I've been reassigned. The intelligence we gathered is being used to plan a major operation against the Arbiter and his network. I'll be leading one of the tactical teams." Terry felt a strange hollowness at his words. Their paths were diverging. It was natural, expected even, but the realization still hurt. "When do you leave?" she asked. 3 days. He turned to face her directly. "Terry, what happened on Meridian Station and during our journey? It changed me. Made me question priorities I've never questioned before." Her skin glowed with emotion she couldn't hide. Vixillians couldn't lie about their feelings. Their skin patterns revealed everything. "It changed me too," she said simply. "I want to ask you to wait for me," June continued. "But that wouldn't be fair. You need time to heal, to discover who you are without the shadow of what happened to you." Terry nodded slowly. "And you need to complete your mission without distraction." "Not a distraction," he corrected. "A reason. But yes, I need to finish this." He reached across the space between them, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. Respecting her boundaries, always. Terry bridged the gap, placing her hand in his. "Then we both have paths to walk. Perhaps they will cross again." "I believe they will," June said with conviction. "Some connections are worth waiting for." As they sat together watching the stars, Terry realized that for the first time since leaving her homeworld, she was looking forward rather than back. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined her. She had survived. She had helped others survive. And in doing so, she had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. The liaison program would start in 2 weeks. By then, June would be gone, fighting to dismantle the network that had trafficked so many lives. Their future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: neither of them would be the same person they had been before their paths crossed. And that, Terry thought as her skin glowed with renewed hope, might be the greatest gift of all.